to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Ben Swire, author of the book Safe Danger, which is a title I really loved. That's what drew me to this. An unexpected method for sparking connection, finding purpose, and inspiring innovation. Ben, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
So, Ben, let's start off with you giving us kind of the short story about how you got to where you're at right now.
The short story of where I got to right now is that God looked at who I am and laughed and decided, I'm going to put you in the most uncomfortable position ever. I am a deep introvert, deeply shy. And my career now is about walking into rooms full of strangers and getting them to open up and talk to each other and play. The slightly longer version of that is that I spent much of my career working in financial marketing, working at Morgan Stanley on Wall Street, a very structured environment. But I've always been a bit of a sort of creative platypus, lots of different parts of me that are squished together that don't usually have a career path. But at a certain point, I discovered this design and innovation firm called IDEO that many people may be familiar with, but they first designed the first mouse for Steve Jobs. They've designed all sorts of marvelous things. It's a creative powerhouse. And I joined them, and emotionally, it was like going from Kansas into Oz. It was going from a place that motivated people through either carrots or sticks about either, trying to get promotions or fear of being fired, to a place where everybody was trying to do the best work of their life because they were connected to the people around them. They wanted to encourage everybody else to do the best work. It was a culture of trust and openness and vulnerability, and they were just doing amazing work. And I was knocked over. I didn't think it was possible to have a place that wasn't built on fear or greed, that would work this hard, that would put in this effort and these hours. And I fell in love with that culture. And I spent some time sort of analyzing, trying to figure out what was the key of this. And to me, it seemed to be trust. That these were people that trusted each other with their worst ideas, with their best ideas. They weren't looking over their shoulders. And while I was there, I started a series of what I thought of as sort of creative play dates, as a way to practice and build that emotional muscle memory that it took to be vulnerable, to be open, to be creative. And those workshops that I designed grew and grew. People loved them. They became sort of the tentpole of our community. And eventually they grew into their own workshops and spun off into the business that I now run as an entrepreneur with my wife, called Make Believe Works, and the ideas in this book, Safe Danger, which is about the sort of principle that I use when I'm designing activities, the safe danger idea.
Is your superpower being an introvert, which makes you more authentic to the people that you're coaching?
My superpower, I think, is the hard-earned lesson that the dents and dings that I most want to hide are probably what makes me most valuable. And facing and just sort of pushing through the constant anxiety and fear of sharing that with people, because that seems to be where my best ideas come from and where I am most useful to other people, to show them that they're either not alone or to give them permission and comfort, bringing out their own idea, their own dents and dings, the things that make us who we are. There's a great line by the poet Rumi where he says, "The wound is where the light gets in." And that's a line that has always stuck with me, because I find that the things that make people the most interesting are often the things that they're most trying to hide.
Well, I think also the mistakes, like my students tell me when I tell them all the mistakes they've made, and they're innumerable. My students always tell me that's the stuff that they learn the most from, not
Yeah.
from any of the successes I've had. But when I tell them how I failed in different things, they go, "Oh, wow. I mean, that's like really valuable." to them.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's a thing I've seen in the best leaders that I've had and that I've worked with, is that they are willing not just to share their own failures, but to see the failures of the people around them as an opportunity to learn. They're not thrilled that people are failing, but they know how to process it. They don't punish it. They take it as a moment to say, okay, what went wrong? How do we learn from this? How do we use this as a stepping stone so that next time we don't just fail, but we do even better? And it's exactly what you're saying. It's the way people can learn the most. If you're in an environment that punishes failure, that if you get it wrong, you're going to get fired, it's a recipe for a stagnant, uncreative culture where no one takes risks because they can't afford to.
We tell when I tell students, I said, there'll never be a time when you give an answer in class that I'll say it's stupid. And I remind them that when you're leaders running a company, the minute you tell one person it's stupid, you've shut off the valve of ideas
Yeah.
with everybody else. And now you're just burning money because now these people who know your business are afraid to tell you anything and
Yeah.
give any new ideas. And that's what's going to keep you from being the next blockbuster or one of the other failed, megastar companies that don't really exist anymore. So let's jump into your book. In chapter one, Safe Danger, you open by comparing your work to a chef's secret ingredient, safe danger. What's the smallest example you can give of what that actually looks like in front of a room full of skeptical adults?
Yeah. Well, first, I feel like I should explain what safe danger is because it is a bit of a counterintuitive idea. Most people tend to think of safety and danger as opposites. Um, I have come to find that pairing them together, seeing them as dance partners, sort of, is a much more productive way of using both. Safety gives us solid footing, but danger gives us the movement. And if you're in a community that only chases safety, it tends to stagnate. And if you're in a community that is always about risks and danger, then you burn out. So safe danger, this idea of it, is the idea of the emotional sweet spot between the two, where you create an environment where people feel safe enough to leave safety behind, but still stretched enough to grow and to challenge themselves. Because that's where I found that real connection, creativity, and real trust really thrive. So the smallest example I can say, I've seen leaders try to create these sort of spaces with big gestures and big events and that sort of thing. I don't think it's about just those big things or handouts and things. I think it's about the tiny signals that leaders send every day. When they invite, as we've been talking about, when they invite dissent, when they admit mistakes, when they treat experiments as opportunities to learn, they show that risk is welcome, and it creates that moment of safe danger. So I worked with a VP once who had started, after we talked a little while, she started a really simple ritual. At the beginning of every Monday meeting, she would just share one thing that she'd gotten wrong the previous week. It could be anything. It could be a misstep in a meeting. It could just be like adding sugar instead of salt to a recipe. Whatever it was, missed trains. She would just open with that. And at first, her direct reports and her department weren't quite sure what to make of it. Why was this happening? What were we supposed to do with this information? And she just said, I'm just sharing it. And she kept going week after week. But eventually what happened was other people started volunteering their own mistakes. It became more of an honest conversation about what wasn't going well in their lives or whatever it was. And it created an atmosphere where people felt comfortable sharing what wasn't working. And it led to faster learning, sharper debate. She told me that like within a quarter, the dynamic in the team had shifted dramatically. People were taking more experiments, taking more ownership of things, solving problems more creatively. And I think that's a really small but impactful example of safe danger, where you, as a leader, open up the room for mistakes. You show them that perfection may be a goal, but it is not a demand. It is not an expectation, it's a process. And you create room for moving in that direction.
It's funny when you talk about that because in Asia, everything is about perfection and that the leader can't show any imperfections.
Yeah.
Even there was a big debate here about Ho Chi Minh, a guy, a famous entrepreneur, wrote a book about him showing some of his flaws, and people went half the people went insane that he mentioned any flaws. But by mentioning the flaws, it takes more pressure off of everybody, especially young people who feel they have to live up to a certain standard that's impossible to live up with. So, in many ways, the in Asia, they're following us, but 30 to 40 years behind. Like psychology is becoming a big thing here, where you'll send your kids to a psychologist. It's no longer an embarrassment. I'm 65. When I was in my late 20s, 30s, nobody went to a psychologist unless there was something really wrong with you. And now in America, everybody has a
Yeah.
psychologist, and people openly talk about it, and your boss doesn't think there's anything weird that you would go to a psychologist. So this whole idea of being open to talk about mistakes actually gives the West still an edge in terms of development of products, services, people, companies, because people are literally still here afraid of making mistakes because they even have a culture of that if you make a mistake, they take 30% of your salary for the month or 3 months for making a mistake. So you want to play it safe
Yeah.
rather than take any chances at all.
And I think, especially as we move into an era of AI dominating, as AI gets better at answering all the questions perfectly, the role of humans in the workplace, I think, is really going to lean more into the category of questions, of asking good questions, of, AI is really good at converging, finding best practices, and repeating what has worked in the past better. People are good at diverging. They're good at questioning things, splitting, being surprised. AI may hallucinate, but it doesn't dream. And you need people to come up with those questions. You need people to challenge things. And if you create a culture where the leader needs to be flawless, you've also created a culture where the rest of people can't question them, can't push back, can't point out that there's a mistake. And you may create a community of comfort where everybody knows their role. They do that, but I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people are making around the world right now, is confusing safety with comfort. Because I think when you get to that level, the calm waters on the surface may be just masking the trouble underneath. I worked with a company once that had gorgeous offices, free meals, meditation pods. Everybody was really comfortable and happy, and they all got along. And on the surface, it looked like a great place to work. But they came to us after a product launch had failed. And what they did is they learned that several employees had seen the flaws weeks earlier, but stayed silent. And they stayed silent because, as they put it, disagreeing is not how you get promoted here. So this is a company that had built comfort, not safety. And that cost was innovation that never made it to the daylight. And I think that mentality of everybody needing to be perfect leads to the same sort of silence. And that sort of silence is very expensive.
So let's talk about, you point out that our instinct for safety literally kept our ancestors alive, but now it can tip into stagnation. How do you tell the difference in a team when caution is healthy versus when it's holding people back?
You tell, I think, by the sort of risks that people are willing to take, by the sort of questions that they're willing to ask. Are they willing to question the leader? Are they willing to ask why are we doing this in the same way that we've always done it? When people are willing to disrupt things, that's when you see a healthy sort of disruption and healthy sort of risk taking. I think in a place where everybody agrees with everybody else, as we've been talking about, when you've got a community where everybody is working hard to make sure that there's no friction, that's a real danger sign. because friction is how you get light. It's how you get sparks. It's how things come. Real safety and that sort of thing is when people are able to stand out and still belong. It's not about removing friction. It's about creating a culture of trust and vulnerability in a way that the friction is productive, and that it lights up possibilities that would have been missed. Playing it safe in the past is what our brain, our brains are designed to lean into that direction. We just haven't had enough time to evolve out beyond the savannah, like structurally in our brains. So it does take some effort to change that mentality and to push a little bit beyond. But it's the world we live in, and if our hope is to get to the sort of goals that we've set out of innovation, of creativity, of new ideas, of better ways of doing things, of rethinking things, then it does require pushing beyond safety, pushing beyond comfort, letting in some danger.
You're candid that most people hate team building. What do you think traditional team building gets so wrong? And how did that failure shape activities you design?
I mean, if I'm being completely frank, I've always loathed team building. I was absolutely one of the eye rollers. I looked for the exits as soon as anybody mentioned role playing skits. And, a lot of our clients find us because they look up things like team building that doesn't suck. And I think that is earned. I think, honestly, the reason most team building fails is because it optimizes for the wrong things. It either optimizes for fun, pure and simple, or for instruction. And neither of those actually build a team. They don't build trust. They don't build connection. They don't build something that is going to last beyond the moment. And for a lot of the stuff that they're trying to instruct people on, it doesn't deepen understanding because the things that they're trying to build, things like resilience, things like connection and trust, don't come from bullet points. They come from experience. They come from feeling it. And fun matters, absolutely, on a team, but it isn't enough on its own. If nothing new is revealed about who we are, about why we do what we do, where we're coming from, then, we didn't build a team. We filled a calendar. So when we design our things and when we think about team building, I mean, when I talk to other people, there are 3 traps that I see with most team building all the time that makes it wrong for a big portion of any sort of community. So the first is competition. Now, competition is a really quick and easy way to get people fired up. They love it. They know how to fight with each other, scavenger hunts, game shows, all of that can be really fun. But competition inherently divides people. It pits them against each other, encourages showing off, and most people lose. So if the goal is for people to lower their guard and show up as their authentic selves, to try to get some new insight into these people that you're working with, it's not a great mindset to be in if you want people to really understand each other. The second thing that I see in a lot of activities is passivity. Also really fun stuff, things like cooking classes or paint and sips, but basically where the people in the room just do what they're told and they don't add anything of themselves to the experience. So it doesn't matter who's in the room. It always runs the same way. If you don't have everybody in the room both giving and receiving, both teaching and learning, if there's no skin in the game for them, then more often than not, you're going to get people walking out thinking, if I'd skipped that, no one would have noticed, because they don't feel that their presence was valuable or valued. And then the third thing that I see as a drawback is something I call old news, which can be fun stuff like escape rooms or happy hours, but basically where you carry the old dynamics into a new room. So the loud people get loud, the quiet people get quiet, the friends stick together, and then everybody goes back to work with no new insight or feeling. You really want the impact of this time together to last beyond the time together. So fun has to have depth. The goal is behavior change, not just a break from work, but changing how you work. And when it's done right, what I've seen is that team building isn't fluff, it isn't a distraction, it's fuel. It's infrastructure. It's where teams actually get to practice the trust, the curiosity, the connection that drive real results when it matters. But those things need to be practiced before, they show up in real life.
Yeah, I like your advice a lot, and I believe in the same thing. In chapter two, safety that sparks instead of stagnates, you draw a line between safety that energizes a team and safety that just keeps things comfortable. What's a warning sign that a safe team culture has actually gone stale?
I think counterintuitively, it's when everybody agrees with each other. Because if nobody is challenging things, then you've gotten into a place where curiosity is not leading the charge. And I think if you get to a place of comfort where everybody just agrees with each other or they assume that they know everything about each other and all of that, it begins to create a sort of placid assumption that you can't do any better. There's no charge. You need that friction. You need people asking different questions and challenging each other. That's what I've found is the biggest sign of a place that's too comfortable.
I'm I find that it needs to be authentic. Like I always say to my teams, I don't want you to disagree with me just to disagree with me. I want you to believe in why you disagree with me. Or I will set up teams when we're creating a product and say, your job is to find the holes in everything that we're doing.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to make them up. Tell us where we're falling short here so we can be successful. And I think that's the role that AI has now plays, that you come up with an idea and you write it out and you write your plan. Now you ask AI. So tell me, what could we do better on this plan? And I find that maybe AI is easier than other people in the room telling you, where some people hold grudges that somebody questioned them. What's your take on that?
I mean, I think AI is a great tool. I think that, as I said, it is excellent at pulling out best practices. I do deeply feel that there is, when it comes to challenging, when it comes to intuition, when it comes to that there is a piece of the person in the room, the humanity, what we've been through, that is that X factor of value. That if you create a culture where people are comfortable, but that's the are feel safe to do that, and I think that's the key piece of what you said. That people can hold a grudge, they can take it personally, they can know that, and creating a culture where people understand that being asked to explain your ideas is not an insult, is not a challenge, but is rather an opportunity to make it better or to help other people catch up to you. Where you lead with curiosity, saying, why did you come up? Why did you get to this place? Why are we doing it this way instead of that way? That ability to challenge assumptions, to question the obvious, to lean in, is something that sometimes just comes out of human curiosity. You may not even know what the question is that you need to ask. You just might feel like there's a piece here that I'm not getting. And being able to articulate that in a safe environment, I think really pushes the work forward in a way that is necessary if you really want to challenge your own ideas and get somewhere good. I mean, that's the whole point of collaborating, is to bring other minds into contact with your own.
You talk about adding a sprinkling of danger into safe environments. How much risk is the right amount, and what happens when leaders overcorrect and add too much?
I think you want to create a culture where people are taking risks for a reason. That it's not just being reckless, it's not risks for risk's sake, that it's really driven by a sense of purpose, that it has some guardrails. There are clear values, there's a clear goal in line. But you need that sprinkling of risk to jump, for the train of thought to jump the tracks. You really want to be able to create enough space where people can take risks, they can challenge things, and that's part of the culture that you're in. But at the same time, it is not just about breaking things for the sake of breaking things. It is not about just being disruptive for the sake of being a thorn in everybody's side, for always being the devil's advocate. It comes with intention. It comes with purpose, and it comes out of a place of good, of wanting better work, not out of a place of trying to establish yourself and your personal brand. And, you know, it's about pushing the work forward. And I think if you come from that angle, with that respect for the work that you're doing, those are the boundaries for creating risk and danger.
In chapter 3, you lay out 5 principles of safety and 5 principles of danger side by side. Was there a principle from one list that surprised you by how much it depended on the other? Maybe you can just quickly tell a little bit about those principles.
Yeah, well, I mean, the ones that come to mind that are definitely interwoven. One is this idea of that of danger, that you need people to put skin in the game. You need people to invest themselves in the activity, the work. You need those principles were specifically about creating team building activities, and it's along the lines of what I talked about with the passivity and with all that. That you need people to share something meaningful of themselves in the moment. The flip side of that is creating enough safety that people feel comfortable declining, that they don't feel pressured to share more than they want to share, that it doesn't become a situation of forced therapy, because if they participate, they resent it, but most likely they'll just shut down. So it's about finding a balance there of asking people to show up in a meaningful way, but at the same time giving them an out, allowing them to decide for themselves what they share. And for me, the way that I navigate that is by going first. I tell them I'm going to ask them to share this, for example, one activity might be about sharing a person who inspired you to become who you are, without whom you wouldn't be in this room. Why were they important to you? Where did they come from? What did you learn from them? And have you been able to do that for somebody else? Some people are very comfortable answering this. Other people feel like it's nobody's business. But I will go first, and I will talk about my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Goldman, what she taught me about taking risks and advantages, and I will also talk about where I've fallen short and where I'm still working. So I model the different moments of this. And in that, it allows people to see what's expected of them, that it's okay. And generally what I have found is that once people see that it's safe to do this, they will go ahead and participate even if they have hesitation. I'll say, the whole idea of safe danger actually gelled for me in a moment completely unrelated to work and unrelated to teams. It was on a playground, and it was with my 5-year-old. And she was looking at the rings, the big kid rings that they go across, and she really wanted to do it, but she was scared. And so what I did is I lifted her up and I had her hold on to the middle rings. And then I told her to let go. And she looked scared, and I said, it's okay, let go. And she did, and she dropped, and she hit, and she crumpled. And I said, okay, that's as bad as it gets. If that was too much, let's wait a year, and you'll come back when you're a little bit bigger. If it was manageable and you're okay, have at it. Her eyes lit up. She went back. She did it over and over and over again, because now she knew what was at stake, and she knew she could handle it. And so part of what I try to do in these moments with people is, if I'm asking them to take some risks, I try as best I can to show them what's at stake and to show them that it's handleable, so that they're willing to take a step outside their comfort zones, outside the things that we're all used to doing at work, which is presenting a personal brand and keeping us looking like we know everything and all of that. They begin to be comfortable opening that gate and showing some of their authentic selves and understanding that it's safe to do that.
Skin in the game and low stakes sound almost contradictory. How do you design an activity that feels like it matters without making consequences of failure too real?
Well, part of what I try to do, like I said, I try to model it for them so that they see that the consequences aren't devastating, that they see that the consequences are worth the effort and the risk that they're taking. I think that's a key piece of it. They just have to understand. For a lot of people, the fear is coming from a place of almost just habit. They're not sure what they're afraid of. They just know they're not supposed to speak up. They're not supposed to share this at work. And so if I'm asking people to put some skin in the game, I try to make those fears specific, to clarify, okay, I know that you're worried about looking silly in front of your, in a professional context. And so I'll design an activity so that everybody looks silly. I make sure that the field is level, that nobody can be humiliated, or if there is an embarrassment, that it's universal across everybody. Nobody is made to stand out if they're unwilling to stand out, but at the same time, everybody's voice is heard. And finding that balance is key, I think, because you want everybody to feel like they were important, but you don't want anybody to feel threatened or exposed in a way that they resent.
In chapter 4, to accelerate productivity, inspire joy, you list barriers to joy like perfectionist, the control freak, and the protective pessimist. Which of these do you see most often in high performing teams, and why does high performance seem to attract them?
I mean, the one that I see the most is perfectionism, that you just get people that need to get it right, that and tend to approach their tasks knowing where they're going before they even set out. And that perfectionist tunnel vision can come at a real cost. You can miss opportunities along the way. But in terms of people's joy, in terms of being happy about it, it sets them up to constantly disappoint themselves. They'll do 100 things right, miss a comma in the next, and it's that comma that haunts them. So I often design activities that are meant to help people release that grip on perfectionism for a time and remember what it feels like to trust their intuition and their instincts a bit more. I think that is very hard for a lot of people, especially in the beginnings of their career, because they're getting rewarded for being perfect. And that can be hard to give up. But what I have seen again and again is that I meet people in the middle of their careers who are burned out, who haven't learned how to celebrate a win because they expect perfectionism. So perfectionism isn't the success, it's the expectation. And so every project that ends, it's just on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one. And they don't take the moment to really understand what they've achieved in all that effort. So, and that makes sense.
Don't they run the risk of burning their teammates out by being perfectionist?
Well, absolutely. I think that's what I found is that perfectionists actually, they need some help learning how to use their teammates productively, how to both give to them and receive from them, how to use that energy of wanting to push the work, but in a way that doesn't mean it's all on one's own shoulders, how to ask for help, how to offer help, how to take in other people's ideas. That perfectionism tunnel vision more often than not, comes with the idea that if I don't do it, it won't get done right. And that is exhausting. And it's, as you say, it's demoralizing for their colleagues who feel like Mark is never happy with what I do unless he does it himself. So why am I even going to bother? So it's really, I think, having that openness, letting go of that perfectionism helps both the individual, it helps the team, it helps the work.
You push back on the idea that joy is just a nice to have and argue that's actually productive. What's the mechanism there? How does joy actually translate into better work?
Yeah, well, I think it's one of the sort of counterintuitive truths of the workplace that I feel like people have a really hard time believing and absorbing. But if you look at the research, it's pretty stunning that the happier people are, the more joy there is in the work, the more productive they are, the fewer mistakes they make, the bigger the impact they have on their organization, the more creative their ideas are. I mean, the stats are really staggering, and it comes down to a couple of things. I think it's both, I mean, it's structural. Our brains actually do work differently when we're happy, when there is joy. Cortisol and adrenaline, stress hormones, focus us. They narrow the aperture of our thinking. They paralyze us in terms of taking risks. Whereas dopamine, serotonin, and other things that bring joy that flood the brain with joy, open up new ways of thinking, make it easier for people to make unexpected connections. They allow for more a sense of purpose and motivation. When you're happy and you're doing something that you believe in as opposed to something you feel forced to do, you work harder because it's important to you. You show up more because you care. All of these levels, both structural, both emotional, both, economic, it's really stunning that it feels so counterintuitive to so many people that joy is a fuel in business, not a distraction.
I think you get way more out of people when they're relaxed than you ever do when they're uptight. It makes no sense. When I first came to VinUni and I took over the hackathon, I said, "What's the purpose of the hackathon here?" And they said, "It's to see how much stress the students can take." And I said, "Well, that's idiotic. Like, why would we do that when every CEO is trying to figure out how to reduce stress in the work environment to get more out of people?
Yeah.
So why would we do that?" So I stopped the practice of sleeping overnight on the gym floor. I said, why would we do that? It's uncomfortable. It doesn't make for better production. If that were the case, every company would be doing it in order to come up with brilliant products and services. But no, that never works. And every study, right, shows that if you work 70, 80 hours a week, you're really only productive 35 of them.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure people take their rest so they're much more efficient with their time and come up with brighter ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. It is fascinating to me that it is so counterintuitive for so many people that joy and play. I mean, even from an organizational point of view, it's so well documented that you save so much money when people are happy because turnover declines. People stay where they are. When people are asked why they stay at a place or why they leave, it is very rarely because of salary. They may come for the money, but they stay for the people. They stay because they're happy and they're connected. And if you are doing all the work to find the right people, then obviously you want to keep them and you want to get all of the talent out of them that you can. You want to squeeze all the juice out of the orange. And you do that by making them happy, by making them love what they're doing with the people that they're doing. You connect them so that they feel like their colleagues support them and aren't out to get them. All of that, as soon as there's a crisis, those are all the traits that are quickly cut. They go first. They're seen as nice to haves. And yet, it's just shooting yourself in the foot because then you are left with people that are looking over their shoulder, that are stressed out, that don't have the wherewithal to get you out of whatever hole you're in.
Well, isn't that the true with even couples? When you see couples laughing all the time together, they're in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
The ones where they're not laughing much, it's not going to last. And I think that's the same as business, even in professional sports teams. The teams are relaxed and joking and teasing each other.
Yeah.
They make it. I once had a Navy SEAL who trained elite Navy SEALs. And what I thought was interesting, I said, "How do you know the ones who are going to make it?" He said, when those guys are all in the water and they're shivering and they're all chained together, the guys who are just trying to get through it, they fail. The guys who are making jokes about it, they're the ones that become SEALs. He said,
Yeah.
"It's not about being the strongest, the fastest. It's all about mental toughness." So he said, when you're on a mission, guys are cracking jokes the entire time. and hence the team plays at a higher level.
Yeah.
If the leader's dead serious all the time and there's no fun, then the mistakes are made and people can get killed. That's what he told me.
Yeah.
So he's those people who can just joke about things, they're the ones that survive it and are the best ones. And I met a captain in the SEALs who had like a couple thousand guys in him. He was like a game show host. I mean, I just didn't expect that of him, but he was hysterical uh,
It's
in the
often
way,
interesting, yeah,
yeah,
how smart, how smart or
yeah.
capable often goes with humor. And I think it's
Oh,
another piece of the brain
100%.
is that to be funny, you have to be able to function on at least two levels at once. You have to be able to see what is literal, and then you have to be able to twist it in a way that is unexpected and surprising. And that means your brain has to be elastic enough. It has to be loose enough. It can't be narrowed into that one single focused moment. And you see it with in quantum physics with Richard Feynman. You see it with as you said, your SWAT leader. I happen to know, or the SEAL leader. I happen to know an FBI SWAT leader who is again one of the funniest people. Just knows how to tell story, but his mind is able to hold multiple things at once, twist them, and it makes all the difference.
Rich Devine is his name. In chapter 5, to pinpoint purpose, inspire vulnerability, you connect vulnerability to both purpose and mattering. Why do you think so many workplaces treat vulnerability as a liability instead of a tool?
I think there's two reasons. I mean, I think the first is that they think of vulnerability as a sort of all or nothing thing. And vulnerability, having a place that's vulnerable, doesn't mean, every elevator ride turns into a therapy session. It is not about trauma dumping. Vulnerability, when I talk about it, is just means sharing your honest thoughts, being your authentic self in the workplace. I think it is threatening for so many people because they've been taught or they have learned through unfortunate experiences that authenticity can be used against them. That if they make a mistake and admit it, someone might hold it against them. They might bring it up in a review, use it as an excuse to keep them from a promotion. And that is, in certain workplaces, absolutely valid. You have to take care of yourself. To me, it is just it is a tragic situation of an organization shooting itself in the foot. If they are afraid of vulnerability, if they are afraid of creating a place where people feel comfortable speaking their minds, opening up, all of that, they are limiting what they can get from the people that they're paying to be there. And I think, again, it's a counterintuitive thing. I think people the other piece of it is vulnerability is harder to control. If you tell people, I want you to become, here's the cookie cutter mold. This is what this job looks like. This is what this resume expects. This is all I want from you. I want your resume here, 9 to 5. When you go home, you can be a person. And that's easier for leaders to control, to understand, to make sure that they meet their KPIs and their distances, their expectations. I think a lot of places are really good at rewarding employees for what they do. I think very few are good at celebrating people for who they are, because that requires that sort of vulnerability, and it's scary. It's less easier to predict, and it's less easier to control. And
It's
prediction and control
interesting.
are what they want.
I teach a class in leadership, and I tell my students that it's very important for them to make the leader feel safe that they can admit mistakes. And so I said to them, how many of you would lose faith in a leader who admits their mistakes? And about half the room said they would lose faith.
Yeah.
So I said, well, now you're doing the exact opposite of what the leader is supposed to do. You're basically now saying, oh, that was a stupid idea. And now the leader's afraid to share anything with you that would help you grow
Yeah.
as an individual and as a team. So you're doing habits that you don't even want the leader to do with you.
Yeah.
You're doing to the leader. My students told me they never really thought about making the leader feel safe. Um, and I said that's a big problem because leaders feel like they have to be perfect, and if they're not,
Yeah.
it's then they start to it starts to drag them down, and they end up in the hospital with thinking they have heart attacks.
Yeah. And that's exactly, I hear that again and again and again and again from leaders, which is they say, I wish I would like to be more open, but I know my people won't respect me. I know what they're expecting. And it's exactly what you're describing because they haven't had a teacher who has said, this is on you too. If this is what you want from your leader, you have to make it safe for them to be that person. And the advice that I always give to the leaders is, if that it's not just about admitting your mistakes. It's teaching your people what to do with those mistakes and with that knowledge. It's, I made this mistake, but it's not about the mistake. What it's about is, this is why I thought I was making the right choice. This is where my thinking was, where I missed an assumption. This is what I've learned from it, and this is where I'm going. So in that case, you are sacrificing your godlike perfection for hard-earned wisdom. And it is a shift in how you're going to be perceived as a leader, as opposed to somebody that just always intuits the right answers immediately, as opposed to someone who has worked for them and gotten to them. But if what
Well,
you're hoping to do is to teach your people how to be leaders themselves, then I think the worst thing you can do is to teach them that they need to be perfect every single time.
even as people in relationships,
Yeah.
absolutely. For introverts like yourself, listening, you address introvert outreach directly. What does vulnerability look like for someone who isn't naturally expressive versus someone who is?
So for me, as an introvert, it's not necessarily that I don't want to share things. If anything, I really personally would much rather have a deep and meaningful conversation with somebody than to talk about the weather. That feels like an utter waste to me, and I'm uncomfortable with that. The barrier is often feeling as an introvert that I'm uncomfortable taking up the space in the room. That I don't want to say, everybody pay attention to me now, I have something to talk about. And then having all those eyes on me is exhausting because now I feel like I need to perform in a certain way. So one of the things that I do when I design activities is make sure that people have something to hide behind. I'll have them make something based on, that I do an activity where I'll ask everybody to think about the year ahead and to come up with a motto for themselves that encapsulates how they want to grow as a person over that year. Then I'll have everybody swap mottos anonymously, and what I do is I ask them to create a gift for the author of the motto that they've received. I ask them to bring that motto to life as sort of a wild, playful, colorful sculpture that can sit on their recipient's desk and be a sort of vibrant reminder of what's important to them. And during the share back, when we hear about what people have made and why they've chosen their mottos, what I've found is that the introverts especially talk and talk and talk because they sort of think they're talking about this thing that's been made for them or the motto that they came up with. And what they're really sharing are their values, their priorities, their perspective on life without even noticing it. So it comes flowing out because they don't realize they're necessarily talking about themselves. It gives them a slight twist to it, gives them something to hide behind. And that's a piece that I have found is really essential for a certain sector of the community that doesn't want to talk about themselves. Often that comes because they've been told that they're not worth talking about, or that they feel like, well, what am I going to share? Or they don't want to hear this about me, or all that stuff. So you create some guardrails, say, this is what we're looking for from you. We want to hear how your mind works. We want to hear why this motto now. We want to hear what's going to get in the way. And then we hear from people about what it is that they're carrying around on their shoulders every day beneath their professional facade, what it is that they're struggling with, what it is they're striving for. And that's what helps people walk away from an activity either having heard other people whose lives have traveled parallel paths to their own, so they see that they're not alone, or they get insight into lives that have gone a very different path than their own, and they get real meaningful understanding of what other people have gone through. But in both cases, it allows for that sort of sharing to come out, and to see that it's safe and rewarding for them to do so.
In chapter 6, to energize bold thinking and inspire curiosity, which I agree with you is just so important for success for the long term. You contrast an explorer mind with an exploiter mind. What do you spot which mode a team has slipped into, and what nudges them back toward exploring?
So what I'm talking about there is it's a developmental thing that actually we all go through. Kids grow up with an explorer mind. It's why they touch everything, lick everything, why it takes them hours to walk down the street, because they're exploring. Everything is equally valuable to them. And about the time we turn 15, 16, the structure in our brain begins to shift. And we focus on what the psychologists call an exploit mentality, where you are trying to master something. You begin to limb the tree and just focus on the few things that you're good at. When I'm working with teams, it is, I mean, I don't, everybody has an exploit mindset. It is across the boards. That is how they have become good at what they do. That is what they are rewarded for the most part. And that explorer mentality of being willing to step back and say, what, to be a beginner at something, to fail at something, to start at zero, can be very, very humbling, embarrassing. It's all tied up with people's sense of self. And so what I try to do with the activities is to distance themselves from the results. It's not necessarily about what you're going to create. It's about the process of creating it. It's about the process in this of trying something new, of remembering what it's like to surprise yourself, to not be good at something, to just go out and explore and see what happens. And I can watch in the room, I can see in people's eyes what it is like when they suddenly remember what it's like to be delighted by the world around them, to be surprised by what they haven't noticed, I do one activity which is based on a brain phenomenon called pareidolia, which is how we always try to find faces in patterns. If we look at, raw wood, we'll see two eyes and an owl facing back. And I did an activity once where I had people go around their office space and find these faces and then write down what they thought the faces were telling the world. And the play and the joy and the surprise as they looked at this space that they were so deeply already familiar with new eyes, with unexpected eyes, with surprise, brought life back into that room that hadn't been there in how long? I don't know. So I think that's the explorer piece. Having people remember how much of the world around them they don't understand, they don't know, and staying curious about it. I have a friend who his career is essentially being curious, and he talks about how when he walks down the street, he'll just look around and try to find something he doesn't understand, but try to make it as simple as possible. Is it a pencil? Is it how do those guys get cement to be so smooth? I can't even get a cake to be smooth when I try to ice it. All that sort of thing. Like, what are the secret techniques that humanity has? If I had to rebuild the world, would I have any idea how to sharpen a knife correctly? Would I be in the Bronze Age? Would I be rocks? Would I be? Do I know what goes into steel? Like, all those sort of questions. The world that we are surrounded by has been built up by so many people taking risks and discovering, then we take it for granted.
Um, you talk about questioning the obvious. What's an obvious assumption on a typical team that you love watching people discover isn't so obvious after all?
Well, I mean, I think we've sort of touched on it a couple of times, but the most obvious assumption that I love is that people who work harder produce better work. It sounds obviously true to a lot of people, and they barely even notice that it's an assumption for a lot of leaders. Right now we're in the midst of trying to negotiate and navigate remote work. And there are lots of offices where people are trying to bring people back into the office pretty much for the sole reason that the leader feels they need to watch people, that people will work harder if they're looking over them. But, if you think about the best ideas you've ever had, very rarely do they come when they're staring intensely at your computer, trying to get that idea out, trying hard to figure it out. It usually happens while you're in the shower or washing the dishes or doing something else, and suddenly the synapses will fire and something surprises you, and it's something unrelated. Hard work obviously matters, but effort and quality aren't the same thing. Sometimes trying harder actually narrows our attention, and we become more controlling, more perfectionistic, more attached to the first or more obvious and conventional solution. I think we tend to confuse working hard with doing the things that produce good work. But a room full of people wandering around, laughing, drawing terrible pictures, asking each other, questions, may to certain leaders look like they're goofing off. But depending on the problem that they're solving, the state that they're in, the mode, whatever, that might be exactly what they need to be able to do the best work possible. So, for me, questioning the obvious is just about noticing that something we thought was a fact was actually an assumption. And then turning that assumption back into a decision, deciding, okay, well, do I really believe that? Do I really believe everybody has to have their nose to the grindstone at all times?
You tell facilitators to lead with curiosity and model the mode. What's the biggest mistake you see well-meaning facilitators make in the first few minutes with a group?
I think the most common mistake I see is that they'll lose faith in the activity too quickly. If it's a well-designed activity, if you've thought it through, you might be standing in front of a room full of people with their arms crossed, looking at you like there's no way I'm going to do this. And that is my life. Most of the people that come in have been through team building experiences that rubbed them the wrong way, that were too cheesy, that were too meaningless. And the temptation for a facilitator can be sometimes to respond to that energy, to apologize for the activity or the play or the silliness, to water it down or give people an easy way around it. But I have really learned over time to trust the activities. If it's designed well, as I said, the resistance is often part of what makes the process meaningful for people, because you're asking adults who have become successful being who they are to do something uncomfortable, unfamiliar, out of their comfort zone. And, it makes them feel exposed. It can embarrass them. And of course there's going to be hesitation. And as I said, that's a key piece of this idea of safe danger. And what I've found is that the job of the facilitator isn't to eliminate that feeling. My job as a facilitator is to hold the container long enough for them to discover that they're safe inside it and to take some risks. I've watched rooms go from absolute skepticism to complete engagement because I didn't panic during those uncomfortable moments. So I think the biggest mistake that facilitators can make is confusing discomfort with failure. I like to say you absolutely need to read the room, but you don't need to obey the room. And I'm constantly surprised by who in a crowd will come up and take the time afterwards to come up and say, when I came in here, I just thought this is not for me. But now that I've done it, when can you come back? We need more of this, because they've experienced something important. They've connected with somebody in a way that they didn't realize was possible. And that's what you want.
So here's my last question. You clearly had to risk your own safe danger to write this book and put it out there into the world. What did it feel? What did that feel like? And was there a moment you almost pulled back?
Um, I'm I'm baffled that you knew to ask that question because we haven't talked about it. But yes, writing it was excruciating. And at the last moment, literally, I think it was 11:47 on the night it was due at midnight, I was reading through the book and thinking through, doing spell check, and I had just a moment, a flash of, I can't turn this in. Not everybody is going to love this book, and I can't face that. And it was a throwback to a piece of me that I thought I had gotten over years ago. When I was a young teenager, I would do creative things, and I'd walk into the school, and then I'd see that I had done something out of the ordinary, and everyone else had done it the conventional right way, and I would throw it away because I didn't want to be laughed at. I would take a 0 instead. That was a trait that I thought I had left behind me decades ago, and suddenly it came flooding back in this literally 11th hour of writing a book about all these things, and it really did hammer home the idea that I was writing this book for me as much as for anybody else. That I still need to learn these lessons, that these doubts kick in all the time. I think, frankly, I think most of us are living someone else's life for much of our time. We end up following expectations that we've inherited from other people instead of choices we've made ourselves. And I, at least, certainly learned early on to hide or diminish the qualities that made me unique because I was desperate to fit in. And that's how we're told to be loved, how to get a job, all of that stuff. I believe in this idea of safe danger because I've found it can be a tool for finding your way back to yourself. It allows you to risk showing up as our real selves instead of someone else's version of us. And I just had to remember that about myself as I was doing this, and then submitted the book, and here we are. And as expected, some people did not like it. Other people have loved it. It has been really useful for people, and that's where I've learned to lean in. A friend of mine who's also a writer, and I was telling that too, it was just said, it's really important that you just remember to focus on proving your fans right instead of proving your critics wrong.
That's
And
interesting.
I found that to be really helpful. I found that to be a really comforting idea of like, nobody loves everything. Pizza can't please everybody. Ice cream can't. So what chance do I have? But I know that these ideas helped me, and I'm passing them along to other people, so there's got to be somebody out there that it'll be useful for. And so I just stick to trying to prove my fans right.
Thank you so much for spending time. I could listen to you for hours, talk about these different things. And I'm sorry we didn't get through every single chapter in the book, but it's an amazing book and definitely worth leaders reading because it's going to help them, especially young leaders, where you can influence them the most, where they don't think they know everything, for sure. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been a delightful conversation.